Cheeky fuckers.
Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the episode Maps and Legends, where we briefly turn the show into CSI Picard and learn about a nefarious super-secret android-hating Romulan faction. Be warned, there will be many spoilers ahead for this episode and previous Trek series, otherwise, enjoy. We open with a flashback to 14 years ago at the Utopia Planitia shipyards on Mars, where work is underway to construct a huge rescue fleet to help the Romulans evacuate their doomed homeworld. We meet some blue-collar Starfleet engineers who are moaning about not getting time off today, as it's also First Contact Day. You remember that day, right, when the Vulcans first made themselves known to humans back in the 21st century? We also see a bunch of mildly creepy-looking androids going about their business helping the day-to-day work at the shipyards, and the engineers seem to treat them as nothing more than tools. However, today these tools suddenly get hacked into and go on a murderous rampage, deactivating the orbital defences, killing everyone in the room, and watching as ships start destroying everything on the surface before shooting itself in the head. Meanwhile at the chateau, Team Picard are going through the security logs of the incident on the rooftop in the last episode, which shows the explosion but nothing else apparently. It seems like this might be the Tal Shiar's handiwork, but they think even the Tal Shiar wouldn't be this brazen to be on Earth for some reason, so instead we get several minutes of exposition about a super secret organisation called the Zhat Vash, a Romulan cabal that were allegedly the precursor to the Tal Shiar, who have a terrible secret that nobody knows. Except Laris and Shaban of course, and this secret is that they have an utter hatred of all artificial life forms. Meanwhile, as they exposit on the nature of the Zhat Vash, we tune into a new episode of CSI Picard, with both Picard and Laris examining Dash's apartment using some funky, illegal magical Romulan forensic technology, and after channeling some Father Ted irritation,
Cheeky fuckers.
Laris manages to determine someone was trying to be very thorough in wiping any trace of what happened there. But, sadly for them, Laris was actually pretty good at her old job and with some persistence manages to find some communication logs between Dash and Soji, confirming Soji does exist but is not currently on Earth. Over on the Borg Cube, Narek and Soji have gone from introducing each other in the first episode to having some classic Star Trek PG-13 sexy time, and as they flirt and talk about how beautiful Borg Cubes are, we see that Narek is being evasive and deflecting questions about himself all the time, though he seems to be genuinely interested in Soji. Back at the chateau, Picard gets a visit from a very old friend of his, Dr. Benayoun, his old chief medical officer on the Stargazer, and after a happy reunion, delivers some unwelcome news that Picard may be starting to develop symptoms of a deadly syndrome caused by a defect in his brain uncovered by Dr. Beverly many years ago. This likely means Picard's time left in the galaxy is soon coming to an end, but Picard desperately needs to be certified fit for interstellar duty and asks Benayoun to give him this certification, to which he reluctantly agrees. With this in hand, Picard goes directly to Starfleet HQ to plead his case with a less than warm welcome from an Admiral Clancy. Picard explains to her what happened in the last episode and then asks for a minimal crew and a small ship to go and investigate where Soji might be so he can save her, and that he'll even happily be demoted to captain if they feel his rank of Admiral is too much of an eye-catcher. But Clancy is distinctly unimpressed and after dropping a cringy F-bomb proceeds to berate Picard for his nerve at asking for this when he clearly left in bad standing many years ago, as well as his less than stellar interview last episode. Picard righteously fights back, but Clancy pretty much nails him to the wall and tells him to fuck off, denying his request, leaving Picard angry and dejected. Checking back in at the cube quickly, we meet another new scientist, a Trill with a name I can't pronounce, so I'll just let Narek do it for me.
Dr. Naashala Kunamandestathy of Trill Polytech.
And we get a nice tour guide speech from a Romulan with a haircut that makes him look like he belongs in the Expanse. He tells them to obey all the signs and make sure if the warning tags they wear turn green, to run like hell before they presumably become assimilated. Narek wants to come along and observe Soji's work, but she says he has to go and get permission to do that, but apparently he really doesn't, and is later observing Soji at work as they dissect and examine some possibly dead Borg drones. Soji doesn't like the fact that the Romulans call some of these guys nameless as they're from an unknown assimilated species, but tells the drone in a foreign language that he's free now, suggesting she might actually know what species he is, intriguing Narek as he observes. Meanwhile, Picard is having some tea with Dr. Jurati, and Picard trolls the audience briefly by saying he never really liked science fiction and just doesn't get it, before the two discuss Dash's apparent fake profile developed for her application into Daystrom. Although everything seems good, it's apparently a little too good, and when Jurati did some real digging, found there was no record of Dash's actual attending her former schools. Based on this, Jurati estimates that Dash was probably created around 3 years ago, with all her memories installed at once. Later on, Picard whips out something from his desk, then goes to stare wistfully at the stars before looking at the object he just took out and slapping it on his chest, revealing it to be a classic comm badge. He calls for someone called Raffi and says he really needs a ship. We then cut to Admiral Clancy briefing a Vulcan Commodore named O about Picard's visit to her. Despite her thinking it's all just a bunch of nonsense, she still wanted to check in with O to see if there's actually anything to it. O reassures the Admiral that if she knew anything then the Admiral would be the first to know. Clancy agrees but tells O to do some digging anyway just to be on the safe side. O then calls in another lady called Lieutenant Rizzo, and it's here that we learn both O and Rizzo seem to be undercover Romulan operatives. She chews Rizzo out for her messy handling of the situation with Dahj, and it's now bringing unwanted attention to their operations here and the Zhat Vash in general. Rizzo suggests killing Picard, but O says that she'll take care of Picard if and when it comes to it, tells her to stay on mission and make sure the only other opportunity they have is not squandered. Rizzo reassures her that she has her best man on the job, though O doubts on this and tells her to sort her shit out and implies there will be fatal consequences if she doesn't. Back at the chateau, Laris is furious at Picard's intentions to go off on his mission to find Soji and thinks he'll just end up getting killed, insisting he stays with them where he's best protected. Shaban, on the other hand, is more supportive, and after suggesting he get the old TNG crew back together, Picard refuses to drag them in. Instead, he's made a call to someone who doesn't like him very much, and sure enough, once Picard arrives, we meet Ruffy, who's none too pleased at seeing Picard, threatening him with a rifle and telling him to fuck off. But, thankfully being a master of wine, placates her with a classic bottle of the good stuff and a quick line about nefarious Romulan activities, and she agrees to hear him out. Finally, on the cube, Narek is continuing to observe Soji in private when he gets a holographic call from Rizzo. It looks like Narek is the best man she was talking about earlier, and more than that, they're brother and sister. She explains that O is getting rather pissed off with them, and that they can't afford to lose her as an ally right now, suggesting O is not actually a Zhat Vash operative, but just some other Romulan spy. Narek tries to reassure Rizzo that he's on the job, and that his method of seduction to get close to Soji and find out what they need is working like a charm. Rizzo says she really hopes so, because if this goes tits up, they're both truly fucked. So, another reasonably okay episode, but with a considerably slower pace this time compared to the first episode. Almost glacial even, since not a huge amount really happens, just establishing some more new characters, lots of info dumping, and generally getting our pieces into play before the plot presumably takes off. This is clearly more of a filler, build-up kind of episode, going at a much slower pace than Remembrance. I'd say the first half of the episode felt rather clunky, with lots of info dumps and expositions, but gets a lot better in the second half where things start to move along or develop plot-wise, and I must have clearly been enjoying it because the episode ended and I wanted more. So let's go through it and see what we have. First up, perhaps the biggest issue I had was the opening teaser showing us the attack on Mars by the rogue androids. I'm gonna stop calling them synths because they clearly look like Soong-based androids to me, but it just felt rather pointless to show us this. We already know about the attack. The reporter in the last episode showed us some footage, and some of us may have even seen the short Trek episode Children of Mars as well, but otherwise we don't really learn anything here except that we see that something clearly triggered or hacked into the androids with that little twinkle in its eyes before going on its killing spree, and this seemed obvious to me that something or someone triggered them to attack without even having to see this directly. I mean, we're clearly going to learn who did this at some point because it obviously ties into the Romulan plot somehow, but to its credit, I found the action here far better and to the point. No quick camera cut self-indulgent ninja fighting that goes on for 2 minutes, just straight to the point, matter of fact, and I also like the crew interactions with F8 before it goes on its rampage. There are just little tidbits of characterization on how people treat these things that calls back to how some people treated Data in the past. After this though, we spent a good chunk of the episode just getting massive dumps of exposition on a super secret organisation within the super secret Tal Shiar called the Zhat Vash, who are basically treated as the Romulan equivalent of the Boogeyman guarding an ancient secret, which is apparently they really hate androids or other forms of synthetic life. We do learn that Laris and Shaban are both former Tal Shiar operatives, and they spend several minutes info dumping us all this exposition in the chateau, which is then intercut with Laris and Picard in Dahj's apartment, doing their best futuristic version of CSI, using funky technology. This all feels a little too clunky and giving the audience all this information at once, and the Zhat Vash are name dropped so many times I feel it's like the writers just want us to be sure the name sticks with us for the future. I'm not really sure how I feel about them yet as an organisation either. The Tal Shiar were always widely reputed in classic Trek as one of the best spy organisations around, rivaled only by the Cardassians' Obsidian Order, and now we have something else on top of that. I guess we can say the Zhat Vash are to the Romulans what Section 31 is to Starfleet, but I don't know. This idea that they keep this terrifying doomsday secret and that allegedly this secret is they hate all forms of synthetic life seems rather weak, unimpressive, and apparently the Romulans overall have never really been into developing artificial intelligence, which immediately made me think of the Season 3 TNG episode The Defector. where Admiral Jarok says this to Data.
You're the android. I know a host of Romulan cyberneticists that would love to be this close to you.
An inconsistency, or retcon perhaps? Well, we'll see I guess, as it will clearly tie into the rogue androids and the Borg as well, given the Borg are essentially a pure fusion of organic life and technology linked to a collective consciousness with the aim of achieving perfection. Anyway, after all this CSI investigation is over, all they really learn is that someone was very thorough in trying to scrub the apartment of evidence, and that Daj's sister Soji is not on Earth, which is treated as a major revelation, but really shouldn't be, I think. I think that's just kind of obvious. But once we've got all the info dumping out the way, the episode finally starts picking up, and Picard starts trying to get himself a ship and a crew, starting off with a meeting with his old chief medical officer of the Stargazer, a chap called Dr. Moritz Benioun. Some might be upset that this wasn't Dr. Crusher, but I actually like this as it gives us a nice throwback to his time on the Stargazer, and actually meeting an active member of its crew. It stops the show from just ticking off the cameo boxes from all the TNG cast, and it's conceivable that Picard and Crusher are now estranged given their previous romantic interest in each other. Plus, she'd likely want to tag along for the mission, and Picard later expressly says he doesn't want to get the old gang back together. Another nice nod to continuity here is that Moritz brings up the issues of a structural defect in Picard's brain around his parietal lobe, which would eventually leave him susceptible to a number of syndromes, almost all of them fatal. This was brought up in TNG's final episode, All Good Things, where future Picard suffered from Irumodic syndrome. Present Picard asks Dr. Crusher to scan for it, but finds nothing except this structural defect in his brain. So I really like that this was brought forward, and I think even maybe some foreshadowing to Picard's eventual fate in the series. I mean, I think there are only two options here, that is, one, dying quietly in his chateau, which doesn't seem that likely, or two, dying a hero on one last adventure, which seems a lot more likely. I know there's a second season of Picard already in the works, but given the age of both Patrick Stewart and the character of Picard himself, this might be a good way to give us a definitive ending for the life of Picard in the future, so let's see. So then he goes off to Starfleet HQ, and after a quick nod to the reimagined Constitution class and Discovery, and another lovely shot of the Galaxy class, he pays Admiral Clancy a visit to ask to be reinstated with a small ship and crew. This scene is largely pretty good, with one exception, that F-bomb she drops. Okay, to be fair, in almost any other show, I'd not even blink or think twice about it, but this is Star Trek, and to hear the word fuck uttered seems so out of place to me. Mild swearing, sure, you can get away with it, and they have done in the past, but it just really takes me out of the moment when I get an F-bomb in Star Trek. But I digress. Otherwise though, this scene is pretty good with some clear overt tension in the room the moment Picard walks in, and it did a good job of exposing some reasoning behind the Federation's reluctance to help the Romulans in the past. The Federation is essentially a United Nations in space with hundreds of species and planets working together, all with the common goal of mutual cooperation in all aspects from exploration to research and defense. So I can totally believe that some member races would be quite happy to let the Romulans suffer their fate, and the Admiralty within Starfleet would want to keep the Federation unified at all costs, even if it meant letting another race suffer or even die to preserve that unity. I've actually got a lot more to say on this topic, but I'm going to hold off for now until we see how the rest of the season plays out, and hopefully we'll get to see more of the Federation's point of view here. When it comes to an overall season review after all 10 episodes have aired, I'll probably go into this in a lot more detail, but for now, let's just say that I enjoyed the explanation, it made logical sense, and we'll leave it at that. It also allowed us another great Picard moment as he pushes back at Clancy with moral outrage at the Federation's current position, but this time Clancy's having none of it and thoroughly puts him down harshly, instantly becoming the most hated Admiral since Vice Admiral Nechayev. I've very little to say about the scene with Dr. Jurati. It's mostly just some more exposition about what Maddox was up to and digging into the background of Daj. The most we really learn here is that Daj and Soji may have been created around 3 or so years ago, as there was no record before that of their existence, and though Maddox is most likely the creator, this is not confirmed yet. Jurati herself is quite amiable, coming across well as a very friendly, earnest and brilliant scientist. I mean, just look at that winning smile she wears when Picard compliments her after she chooses Earl Grey for tea. It's kind of adorable. Later on we get another nice little scene as Picard whips out his old comm badge and looks up at the stars longingly, and then makes a call to a new regular character we meet at the end called Raffi. We know little of her yet, save she doesn't really like Picard, going so far as to threaten him with a rifle, but apparently some fine wine and threat of Romulans is enough to get her attention. As a result, there's little else to say here yet until we know more, so I'll leave that there. But before we meet Raffi, Laris gets rather upset at Picard's intentions and storms off, while Zhaban is simply more pragmatic and advises Picard on the facts, giving suggestions, but is ultimately very supportive of whatever he wants to do. I have to say I'm actually quite liking these two, Laris's accent issues aside. They have a really nice dynamic with Picard, and though I still don't know why they're pretty much serving as his housekeepers these days, they clearly care a great deal for him, and given their Tal Shiar backgrounds, clearly very useful allies to have as well. Yes, I know this is apparently explained in the comics, but I don't read those and would prefer some more on-screen details about their history with Picard. The other half of the episode is largely spent on the Borg cube, as we get to know both Narek and Soji a bit more. As with Dahj in the last episode, Soji hasn't made too much of an impact on me yet. She's played well enough, but the character herself still isn't really all that memorable, even though she's the central plot point of the show. Though I was intrigued why she spoke to the dead unknown Borg in a foreign language, as if she knew how to speak to the species he came from. Apparently though, she and Narek immediately moved to sleeping with each other, which felt somewhat jarring as there was no build up to that, but Narek, I must admit, is a more intriguing character than I initially thought he would be. As I suspected, he clearly had an ulterior motive for befriending Dahj, and clearly knows her true nature, as we also meet his sister, Narissa Rizzo, who appears to be an undercover Romulan agent within the ranks of Starfleet security. Rizzo seems to be more concerned Narek might be getting too attached to Soji or just not doing his job properly, and I do get the impression Narek might be someone who can be persuaded to turn on everyone in order to protect Soji in the end. Narek and Rizzo both appear to be members of this Zhat Vash organisation, and possibly Commodore O as well, as there's a line where Rizzo says that she's been a useful ally and that they can't risk having her turn on them, possibly implying O is not a Zhat Vash member directly, but maybe just an old regular Tal Shiar spy within Starfleet, or even an actual Vulcan collaborating with them. The episode doesn't explicitly say whether O is a Romulan or Vulcan, so we'll have to see, but I quite like all of this, because this feels far more like the Romulans of old, who were always scheming and plotting in the shadows rather than making overt threats and military maneuvers like the Klingons would do. And having moles this high up in Starfleet is a worrying thing for the organisation, but no worse than when Starfleet got its own mole in the highest ranks of the Romulan government back in DS9. It's also established that the Romulan Star Empire, or what's left of it since the destruction of Romulus, has now been reformed into the Romulan Free State, though no information is given as to the political attitudes of this government, but it seems clearly far more friendly and tolerant to other races, suggesting it's a more democratic, or at the very least friendlier state towards the Federation. I have to say I really like these new Starfleet uniforms and insignia. They're very reminiscent of the uniforms on both DS9 and Voyager, but also pretty consistent with possible future variants we've seen of the uniform whenever we've ventured into the future. Overall, the stuff on the Borg cube itself was quite intriguing, as we learn that this cube, which they call the Artifact, was severed from the Collective many years ago, and that there are even active former drones within the cube. It's also implied that the cube is still potentially quite dangerous if you wander off into areas you shouldn't, as they have to wear these little badges which might warn you when you're in danger, and there's also a nice little sign which indicates how many days since the last assimilation took place. There is a mild inconsistency here, given in the past the Borg usually come back to retrieve their damaged technology, including wayward drones if they know about it, but we don't really know the full story behind this cube yet, so I'm quite content to let that slide. We also meet another character, a Trill called Naashala, who's joined the research team studying the cube, and Soji quickly befriends her, but beyond this, we don't really know anything about her yet. So overall, as I said in the beginning, another generally okay episode with not a huge amount of plot development, just moving pieces into play and setting things up. I'm still generally enjoying it so far, and Patrick Stewart remains brilliant as Picard, but I still miss the more episodic, optimistic nature of classic Star Trek, where you have a self-contained story on a per-episode basis, with some character and long-term plot arcs being explored over the course of a season. Until we see the bigger picture of the whole season though, it's going to be very hard for me to judge this overall, but I'm going into it with an open and hopeful mind, so let's see what the next episode, The End is the Beginning, will bring us, where it looks like Picard will finally get a ship and crew, heading off on his new adventure to find Soji before she's killed like her sister. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then please do check out my other reviews as well, and also if you haven't yet, then please like, subscribe and share. Until next time, this is Jay Warden, signing off.